everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Susan Giroux. I'm the Honorary Regent of the Boston Tea Party chapter of the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, as well as the State Vice Chair of the America 250 Committee, along with Darlene Brown, who is our other State Vice Chair of America 250. So the DAR is an organization that was founded to be of service. We have three pillars: education, historic preservation, and patriotism. And as such, we do what we can to preserve historic monuments, houses, places, and to participate in things like America 250. So I moved to Winthrop in 1980, so I'm not from Winthrop. I moved to Crystal Cove Avenue. I'm still there today. And for decades, I would go down to walk on the beach, and in Beacon Circle, there was this granite monument. And I eventually got curious about it. And so one day I went over and I read it. And it was installed by the Dean Winthrop chapter of the DAR in 1927, commemorating the heroic Captain James Mugford and the Battle of Shirley Gut. And it tells the story of capturing the powder ship Hope. I'll talk more about that. And I was blown away because it was history that I had never learned as a student growing up in Massachusetts. I don't know, my impression talking to Winthrop people over the last year is that very few people in Winthrop know about the Battle of Shirley Gut. So I went to my chapter regent and said, hey, Winthrop is going to have its very own America 250 event, our Winthrop 250, and that is the Battle of Shirley Gut, which took place right here. And so I started researching, started working with a team of people from the chapter, and I started learning a lot about the early American Navy and the story of Captain James Mugford. So that's how we got here tonight, and why we're commemorating the 250th anniversary on May 17th, and everyone is invited. So I don't know, again, never learned this in school, just learned it within the last year. George Washington became concerned that the colonial army needed its own navy. And so in the fall of 1775, he started outfitting schooners. Most of them were fishing vessels. And by the fall of 1775, he had 8 fast, lightly armed schooners. At the time, America, the colonists had to import everything, including things like gunpowder, munitions. They had to import everything. So what they did was they went out and they harassed the British supply lines. And in that time, they captured 55 prizes, 8 schooners. And that was because they needed the supplies. They couldn't get them from England because of the revolution. So that's sort of the background. We moved from having just privateers doing this to having our own continental navy. So again, in the fall of 1775, Colonel Glover, who I think everyone in Winthrop has heard of, leased a 60-ton fishing vessel called the Eliza. She had been based in Marblehead. And they armed, refitted, and rechristened her as the Franklin. She served under Captain Selman, Skinner, and Tucker, respectively, and captured 10 ships during that time. So she was a well-established, had been in part of the Navy for a while. 6. The 280-ton ship Hope set sail from Cork to Boston. Now, it sailed in a convoy, and it was escorted by the HMS Greyhound, a 28-gun ship. It was very heavily laden. It contained 1,500 barrels of powder and numerous other armaments. And I think we'll all recall that in March of 1776, Boston, the British fleet left Boston Harbor, evacuation occurred. But this convoy didn't know about that. They were coming across. And someone sent out a ship to divert them from Boston. And on May 10th, the Franklin, or the Hope, as the story goes, was very heavily laden and was lagging behind the rest of the convoy. So the rest of the convoy diverted to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And the Hope continued on to Boston. They just were, following orders. So I keep imagining what that must have been like to be out there in the middle of the ocean and have a convoy of supply ships and a warship and be told, Boston Harbor, we evacuated, go to Halifax instead. And this one ship never got the message. So she continued into Boston Harbor, or toward Boston Harbor. Quickly thereafter, James Mugford, who had been the sailing master aboard the Franklin, took command when the captain moved over to, I believe it was the Hancock. They moved the captain to the Hancock. So Mugford Jr. had been the sailing master, and he's taking command of the Franklin. And I have to say, this picture of him was created in 1780. So I like to think that it's a pretty accurate picture of Captain Mugford because it was created shortly after his death. And he knew the mission, go out, harass the ships, capture supply ships, and he said, I'm going to take her out. And so there were 10 original crew left on the Franklin. I think the others went with the captain. And so he pulled 6 from Colonel Glover's regiment. A lot of the Continental Army were seamen. So they were qualified to be part of this Navy. And he named Thomas Russell and Jeremiah Hibbert as acting lieutenants. And he left Beverly on May 15th on course to Boston. And there are stories that say that he knew that the Hope was coming because he had been impressed on a British ship in the harbor and heard about it. I haven't been able to find any primary source material that shows that that's true. But it's a story that you see repeated and a lot of information about Mugford, that he knew that the Hope was coming. But he knew that he needed to get out there and see what he could do to track down some supply ships and take care of that. So he's on his way to Boston. The Hope is coming toward Boston Harbor. And on May 17th, this is a 60-ton ship. It's a small ship next to a 280-ton supply ship. We're talking about worlds of difference. So the folks on the Hope weren't at all concerned when the Franklin started sailing toward them. They thought, oh, this is a pilot boat. Oops. So they sailed up alongside her and basically took her by surprise. Climbed aboard, pointed guns at the guys who were going out to cut the rigging. The Hope sailors went into the rigging to cut down the sails, and he said, if you guys drop your knives or I'm killing your captain, is the route, what they say he said. And they took her without firing a single shot. And then they led the Franklin into Shirley Gut, or at the time Pulling Point Gut, where she ran aground. The tides were against her, and she was stuck there. So what many people didn't realize, I certainly didn't, was that the British may have left the inner harbor, but they had warships out in the Sound. And there were warships who could see what happened, and they knew that if they didn't get all of that powder offloaded very, very quickly, they were going to lose it, because there were 2 warships sitting right off the end of Shirley Point, so or Deer Island probably. So they weren't the only ones who could see what happened. Quickly the word went out, and Colonel Glover sent hundreds of small boats out to the Hope, and they offloaded all the powder, or most of it, and then when the tide came up, they sent small boats and people along the sides of the Gut to light the way so that they could sail Hope into the harbor at night when the tide was up. And it worked. They got her through the Gut. At the time it was a very curvy fishing channel, so it wasn't just a straight channel. It took some skill to get through it. And they docked her at the Hancock docks and offloaded the rest of the cargo. So when you see 1,000 carbines and bayonets, cartridge boxes, gun carriages, and 6 guns right off the Hope, it was a pretty nice prize. And we desperately needed it, because capturing these kinds of supply ships is how we got the black powder and the guns and the ammunition needed.
Where were the Hancock docks?
I can't say, I mean,
East
they were
Boston,
part of the
or-
original, I think they were right, my impression, just because I have this picture, is that they're right up near where like the Tea Party docks were.
Oh, you think it went in?
Yeah, right in there. Because he was a big landowner in Boston, and he would
okay.
have prime real estate.
I think it was where the child house is.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
right up in there. That's what I think.
Yeah,
Because
Boston
in the
Harbor
child
Hotel
house,
there.
it
Yeah.
used to be John Hancock's bank safety.
Oh,
That
okay.
makes sense. Yeah. So you can picture the frustration of the British who are sitting outside the harbor, who see the Hope, which they desperately needed, just whisked out from under their nose without any kind of a fight. So by the morning of the 18th, all the materials were being offloaded from the Hope, and on May 19th, we get to the Battle of Shirley Gut. We had the Franklin, who needed to go back to Beverly to re-outfit. We had the privateer Lady Washington, an even smaller boat, said, I'll go with you, we'll go to Beverly. And again, I don't understand how this happened, but the tides weren't with them, and the Franklin ran aground in Shirley Gut on its way through. So now we have the Franklin, sort of stuck in Shirley Gut, and we have 2 British warships, the Renown and the Experiment, who can see it. They're like, well, we're gonna take that ship because they took the Hope. So they sent small boats, a flotilla of smaller boats, like whaling-sized boats, a bunch of them. A lot of controversy about whether it was 13 or 5. Not entirely sure, but I'll get to some of the reporting of the time. And the small boat said, hey, we just want to come aboard, and And Mugford said no, and he immediately had his crew fire on them. And they couldn't get the cannons reloaded quickly enough to avoid having some of the boats reach them and men start coming aboard. So there was fierce hand-to-hand combat. On May 27th, which, 10 days, or not even, 8 days after the battle, this is what was reported in the Boston Gazette. By best accounts, there were not less than 13 boats in all, many of them armed with swivels and having on board, at the lowest computation, 200 men. Captain Mugford and his men plied these alongside, so closely with firearms and spears and with intrepidity, activity, and success, that 2 boats were soon sunk, and all the men either killed or drowned. So the news went out very quickly. General Ward, I pulled this slide in at the last minute, so I had been reading more, reading it again. And this is what General Ward said. He was in charge of Boston. Captain Mugford was fiercely attacked by 12 or 13 boats. He and his men exerted themselves with remarkable bravery, beat off the enemy, sunk several boats, and killed a number of their men. The intrepid Captain Mugford fell. He was run through with a lance while he was cutting off the hands of pirates. And then about the Lady Washington was attacked by 5 boats, near or quite 100 men, but after repeated efforts to board her, they were beaten off, gloriously defended against the brutal ravishers of liberty. This is the general's report about this battle, and I love the language. It's very flowery and it gives you a feel for the activity that was going on. So it is said that Captain Mugford was at the rail leading the crew in hand-to-hand combat. Not one British Marine boarded either ship. Captain Mugford was either stabbed by a lance, as reported by General Ward, or took a ball to the chest, but knew he was mortally wounded. And he famously said, "Don't give up the vessel," which, don't give up the ship. So that's a Captain Mugford quote. So they brought him home to Marblehead, where he lived. He had a wife at the time. They buried him in the old burying ground, which has a big monument to him in Marblehead. It's well worth a visit. And the New England Chronicle eulogized him. He made as brave and vigorous a stand in defense of American liberty as any among the living can boast. His funeral was attended with suitable military honors by a detachment of the 14th Regiment. So that is the story of Captain James Mugford and the Battle of Shirley Gut. Does anyone have any questions?
The
Yes.
original 8 schooners that they got, did they just take them? Or, I mean, they didn't have money to buy schooners.
Well, it said that they leased them. So I don't know how, whether maybe some of them were loaned to them, but they leased the Eliza, which became the Franklin, and then she reverted back to her owner. So, and they named their ships the Hancock, the Franklin. They used the names of the people who were then leaders and heroes of the war. So, yeah, that was pretty interesting that they were able to put that together. And Mugford has been honored by the U.S. Navy. 2 destroyers were named after him, one in World War I and one in World War II. So there have been 2 Mugfords. So the Navy honored him as well. Any other questions?
There is
Yeah.
a Mugford Street in Winthrop. Mugford Street.
Yep, there's a Mugford Street. Yep.
In Winthrop. It's about this long.
Yeah.
Because it's down by Shirley Gut.
Yep.
And most of it is like not there. Is there a little section of street sidewalk?
Yep. And there's also in the history room at the E.B. Newton Cultural Center, there are all the banners that have the Winthrop history, and there's a section on Mugford with a sketch taken from this copper plate. So,
Did you
yes.
tell me once that he was quite young and it was his birthday?
Yes, he died on his birthday. He was
Oh, wow.
26 or 27. Yeah. And he had no children, so there are no direct descendants.
How were
Any,
the funds raised for the monument?
the funds raised in
In Winthrop, to
in
build the
Winthrop?
monument?
the Dean Winthrop chapter of the DAR raised funds.
Oh, they raised the
Yep,
funds and they did
and
it
put it up,
independently.
yep. So, the Dean Winthrop chapter, we're trying to find out more because we don't know when it was organized and when it disbanded, but it was, organized in the 20s for sure. And we're trying to find out more. We've asked our state historian and librarian to help us find more information.
Do we know why they chose that location?
Which, the Dean Winthrop?
No.
Oh, the beacon, because
the beacon
the
circle.
battles took place
Place.
off of the shore, that
So-
all that activity happened out in the Sound and in Shirley Gut, so
Right, I just
that's
would've
my
thought it would've
only,
been closer to.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, I thought it was closer to Deer
Yeah.
Island or in that area.
yep. I highly recommend stopping sometime and just checking it out. It's
I
it's
grew up
pretty,
on Crystal Cove, I
See-
saw that monument all the time.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
decades before I stopped and looked at it
Right, I
closely.
read it as a child because there's a bubble there. Or
Oh, there was.
Right,
Yeah,
right, so
yeah. So what we're doing, the chapter, the Boston Tea Party chapter, has organized a rededication of the monument, which will take place at noon on May 17th, Sunday. And then we'll move over to the Dean Winthrop House, and we've planned a commemorative event. And Eric J. Dolan writes historical books. She's going to get his book, Rebels at Sea. He's going to talk about this.
A copy that's here at the library, and
Yes.
there are other copies in circulation in the network. I had Joanne go get it. I've been reading it. It has a lot about Winthrop right in the beginning, and about Mugford and everything that happened. And Eric has done a wonderful job, so I can't wait to meet him.
Doctor.
What kind of a name is Mugford?
Where did he come
from?
English, I think.
I would, to me it sounds English, but I don't know. We did go and try and find some of his family history. We used Ancestry to see if we could find any descendants. That's how we found out he was married. His father, he was Captain James Mugford Jr. His father was also Captain James Mugford. And he was, longtime Marblehead sailors.
And the Marblehead Monument lists all of the sailors that were with him
Yeah,
on the ship,
yeah,
which I thought was very nice.
yes. But again, there's a lot of, going back to the primary source material, I spent a lot of time, I would read something from something like Rebels at Sea, and then I'd try and find primary source material so that I could verify it, so that I didn't mislead anybody. And a lot of the stories were really interesting, but I couldn't verify that he was impressed. I couldn't verify that his wife went aboard the ship and asked the captain to release him, which I thought was a great story, but
Yeah.
nothing. There's a book, I brought it with me. Let me just grab it. That I found really helpful, called George Washington's Schooners, the First American Navy. And one of the things that you get from this book is that he also got the British naval records. So the Americans, the colonial army and navy, said 60 or 70 British Marines were killed. In fact, the British say 5 or 6 in their records. And they don't talk about how many were wounded, but they did lose some of their small ships. An interesting Winthrop side note that we found when we were researching, Professor Robert Allison at Suffolk University, who is on the Revolution 250 committee and will also be speaking on the 17th, said, hey, I have some information. Do you want me to send it to you? And we're like, sure, whatever you can. There was a British Marine who floated ashore down in the court road area of the harbor. And evidently kids found him in a boat. He was buried in the area of Woodside Circle? Is that what it's called?
Woodside Park.
Woodside Park, yes. Yeah, they found him when they were in the 1800s, when they were building those houses in Woodside Park. They found this body, and they were able to identify him, his name and whatnot, from what he was buried with.
Wow.
So, and I tried to find out if they buried him in Winthrop or what they did with him. But they identified in his name that he was from the Battle of Shirley Gut. And they did dig him up and inter him somewhere, we think. So I thought that was sort of interesting.
What's the last name of
Does that book?
Oh, I'd have to look for that because I don't have it here.
Yeah.
I have it, but I don't have it handy. Darlene?
Does that book indicate, this book, when I was reading it, they were talking about George Washington didn't actually have a navy for a long time, but he realized he needed one, so he went and outfitted a ship, and then he went and told Congress, hey, I need a navy.
Yeah.
So he kind of did one of those, here's what I need.
Yeah, and it was those schooners were only in action for a limited period of time. Some of the reporting was so lurid about, hacking, he was hacking people's hands off, and they were keeping them from boarding the ship. And they did a good job, so. Anyone else?
Yeah, just one comment. I probably a lot of people know this already, but Ken Burns is doing a series on PBS
Yep.
for the Revolution, and actually it's been on prior.
Right. Mhm.
This is the repeating of it, so
Yeah.
people can tap into the PBS.
I understand that this is mentioned in that series. I haven't gotten
Yeah.
that far into the
Yeah,
series,
me
so.
either.
Because he's
Yeah.
pretty good about analyzing,
Yeah.
some of the data before he incorporates it in his deliveries.
Yeah. The Navy, we relied on privateers who were sailing with permission to harass the British. So they weren't pirates, they were privateers. And so the Franklin was not a privateer, although that is what it says on the monument at the end of my street.
And there was a difference between privateers, the people, and privateers, the ship. So, as you read all of this, you kind of go, okay, good. I kept saying, this sounds like they were actually pirates. Because they weren't actually this fight. I don't know that they were actually legitimized yet.
Yeah. Well, Mugford was a sailing master.
Well, that's
And
true.
He
was
wasn't
appointed
even
by-
commissioned as a captain when he took the ship out as acting as a captain. And in everything that I read, the primary source material, they talk about him being a sailing master who outfitted the ship and got the rest of the people and went out to sea. But they call him captain. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.